All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first Honeycomb webinar of 2026. I'm super excited today to have Rob and Luke with me. I'm going to get them to introduce themselves in a second. If someone could just maybe comment, just confirm that you can hear and see us fine, that the tech's all working, that would be appreciated. We are live on LinkedIn, we're on YouTube, we're even on X now, temporarily at least, until X gets banned in the UK. And we take no responsibility if anybody decides to use Grok to put any of us in a bikini. That is at your own risk, and the emotional trauma will not be our fault. The way today's going to work, we've got two of the biggest experts I know on the consulting industry in the UK and Europe with us, and I'm super excited to hear their thoughts. So we're going to have a bit of an open discussion, looking back a little bit, and then mostly looking forward into 2026. And we're going to have loads of time for you to ask questions and get your questions answered. So please do, wherever you're dialing in from, wherever you're watching us, stick questions in the comments and we'll answer as many as we possibly can in the time that we've got. So I'm just going to ask these two wonderful gentlemen to introduce themselves, and then we're going to dive into the conversation. So Rob Garner, I'll come to you first.
Thanks, Derry, and thank you very much for the invitation to join you today. Really excited, likewise, for the conversation. By way of brief introduction, so founder and partner of Garwood Growth. We're a professional services specialist advisory firm working with organisations around growth, operations, and M&A. For my sins, 30 plus years in professional services, ex-KPMG partner. Founded my own managed business, which I scaled and exited, and kind of concluded an exec career as CEO of a listed ed tech. I now balance my time in Garwood with a series of non-exec directors as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob, and great to have you here. And Luke, over to you.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you also for the invitation, Derry. So my name is Luke Smyers, and I am the managing partner of thevisibleauthority.com, big name. What I do is I work with consulting firms, both boutique and the big firms, on one thing, which is design or redesign their consulting propositions and service portfolios, as we always say, as the foundation for performance and profitability. So my background is in consulting for now almost 25 years, but in very different positions. I was the European Chief HR Officer for Nielsen Consulting, which in those days was a 5,000 person consulting firm in Europe, of course globally, but I was based in Europe. In 2008, which has always been my dream, I founded a boutique analytics consultancy in the early days of analytics called iNostics, and that firm was acquired by Deloitte 8 years later in 2016. And I stayed with Deloitte during my earnout period for 3 years, where within Deloitte I led and tripled the practice revenue in the analytics practice. And after my earnout period in 2019, I started what I'm doing today, which is we always say TVA, so thevisibleauthority.com, helping consulting firms with their consulting proposition and service portfolio design. That's what we do.
Awesome. Thank you, Luke. For those that don't know me, I'm Derry Hughes, founder and managing director of Honeycomb Consulting Skills Training. So we help consulting team leaders develop exceptional teams, and it's really about behavior change and capability development, and training is a big part of that. But we wrap that around all kinds of programs. And the other thing, some of you may have seen on LinkedIn, on Friday this week, we're publishing our Consulting People Report 2026, which we've written alongside Caroline from New Minds. And so as part of that, I've been talking to loads of people and reviewing the data and the state of the market in 2025 and heading into 2026. So in summary, across the three of us, we work with literally hundreds of consulting firms, have conversations with hundreds across the year. And what we're going to try and do in the next 55 minutes or so is distill what we've learned from those conversations down to the key big things that we've seen, the big trends that emerged last year, and the big things that we're expecting to see this year. Maybe we'll revisit this in 8 or 9 months' time and see how right and how wrong we are on the trends for this year. But certainly, what we do know is the world has been changing very quickly in recent years. So everything is moving at pace. So I'm going to come to each of you with a question looking back in a second. But just to remind everybody, we do want to be answering your questions as well. So pop them as we go through. Just pop questions in the comments. Anything that you're thinking about as to what might happen in 2026. If we can help you answer that, then we would be delighted to. So Luke, maybe I'll come to you first this time on really just the biggest trend that you saw in 2025 that emerged in consulting. What really caught your eye as something really critical that came out?
Yeah, I'm always almost afraid to say it, to say the AI thing.
AI? What's that? I haven't heard of AI.
I try to kind of package it in the way that we have experienced it, and I try to give it a name. So I called it, looking back at 25, the AI double squeeze. Which is a challenge for consulting firms all over the world, I think, because we talk to, except for Asia, we talk about, let's say, the Western Hemisphere, to a few hundreds of consulting firms. And of course, we do between 20 and 30 projects per year where we dive deep. And all of them somehow were suffering from or challenged by the AI double squeeze. And let me explain that. In a lot of consulting firms, there is a substantial share of revenue coming from smaller, maybe ad hoc projects. And for the first time, at a somewhat bigger scale, that part of the revenue shrank materially across most of those firms. So, and the reason why is that a lot of their clients began generating insights themselves using AI tools, integrate with their existing platforms or internal data and so on and so forth. So that's small, and that's the first side of the double squeeze, and that small order take-like task that had traditionally been delivered by a group or a pyramid of juniors under senior supervision, of course. The typical consulting grind, as David Meiser would say, that started dropping. And with this grind dropping in volume, the consulting firms began reducing their junior headcount as a result. Sometimes hiring freeze, sometimes real reduction, realignment. And what we were seeing then, and that's where then the double squeeze starts happening, is that some of that smaller work that still happened, sometimes time-critical requests that come in, were pushed to the senior experts. And sometimes we've had chats where it sometimes landed at the desk of partners. And so that, of course, then becomes a cost challenge. So you have the revenue challenge on one hand, so revenue pressure because of the declining small order taking project work, and cost pressure because some of that work was moved to higher cost seniors. They were dragged into that work that used to be leveraged before. And so that double squeeze was like present everywhere. And we have had, I think, I don't know, maybe 500 discussions about it. And I will come back later on when we talk about 26, how to deal with it, or some ideas how to deal with it. But it all starts, of course, with delivering small order take project work that gets challenged by the clients these days, and some of that work that is taken internally at the client. So that's I have another one, but maybe we can switch between Rob and myself. I have a second observation from 25 later on.
I was going to add to that, Luke, because I think there's probably a triple squeeze, to use your phraseology, or to build on your phraseology, in that actually what we've observed is that in the slightly larger engagements, not necessarily the kind of smaller order take engagements, but in the slightly larger engagements, there's an expectation from clients that there's much more kind of AI leverage in it. And therefore, there is an expectation that there is at least cost containment, if not cost reduction, in some of those bigger projects. And I think you start to put all of those things together and you're starting to look at quite a significant commercial challenge for actually many tiers of the market. You can take it into a kind of a human context in terms of, challenges of routes into the market, progression through, what does that look like? But you can also take it into the straightforward kind of commercial dimension about, without being too grubby about it, how do you make money out of a consulting business model if actually, that is changing dramatically, and what has historically been an engine room of margin has been eroded through those kind of triple effect in essence. So I think there's lots going on there, and I think we saw that the heritage or the early stages of that probably before 2025, but we saw it kind of starting to really come through in 2025. I mean, what I would say, on a slightly more positive note, was that I think we saw 2025 as a return to growth, or maybe the kind of early stages of growth within the industry. So, we all read the kind of press and the doom mongering that there is, that the consulting sector is a doomed sector and we're all working in a failing kind of industry. I don't believe that at all. And actually, I think 2025 showed the early signs of return to growth. I think that bigger firms might have been flat or low digit, but some of the specialist firms and some of the niche firms started to show real signs of growth. And I think that's another trend that we see, is the sort of, not necessarily the rise, but the success perhaps of some of the boutique firms relative to sort of mid-service and larger organizations. And then again, that then plays into, dimensions of how the industry and we as leaders of that industry kind of react, respond, and see that coming through.
Yeah. Rob, you could then almost talk about a quadruple squeeze, because at the same time, there is pressure internally to innovate the service offering with AI. So you have the revenue challenge, clients doing some of the basic work themselves. You have the cost challenge because there are fewer juniors. So there's a cost challenge, seniors doing the work. Then there is what you said, an expectation that things are AI done, and so you get cost discussions, pricing discussions, and then there is, of course, the whole innovation pressure within the consulting firms to innovate with AI and to come up with new services that are AI based, or whatever you call it, or AI first, or AI empowered, or strengthened, whatever you call it. And so it's almost like a quadruple squeeze. Not easy to deal with.
And I think a lot of those trends are actually interconnected as well. The fact that clients now feel like they can do a lot of things themselves that they didn't used to be able to do is then emphasizing the need for specialist support that genuinely drives value. And there's a real clear line between like expertise and value delivered. And that whole thing is just creating this flywheel. I think from my point of view, and maybe I'll use my kind of 25 look back to then pivot into the looking forwards, and we can start to think about that, because I think that's the key thing for people. So what we noticed at the back end of last year, and I'm talking kind of September onwards, was maybe for 18 months or so now, I've been expecting clients to start to come to us with a capability development need around AI. And I would say up until September, roughly 0 clients asked us anything about how do we develop our teams to use AI, because they weren't ready. And I think this double, triple, quadruple squeeze piece is starting to bite now, at the point where people are saying, do you know what, we really have to start to use AI. And we started to get questions about how can we drive what AI use cases should we be using? What do the team really need to be able to do? How can we build that into training? So people are starting to think about the solution to that pressure that they're feeling. I think the other side that we saw come through very strongly was a real desire to upskill people in what I call human skills, the human connection, the empathy, the building trust, going back to all the foundations of the trusted advisor and the trust equation that still remain really important. And I think as everything is changing so quickly, people are realizing that internally and with the clients, they really need those skills more than ever before to help everybody navigate through all of this change without it being just a massive stress and resilience problem for people. So that's the stuff I saw at the back end of last year. So you've got these specialist firms kind of starting to grow, starting to see positivity. We certainly saw our level of inbound inquiries go up dramatically in Q4 as people return to optimism. But what they're really thinking about is, how do we actually use AI now? What does that mean for human skills? And that's the stuff that people are kind of running into 2026 with. So let's start looking forwards. I'm interested to know from you guys, if we fast forwarded 12 months from now, what do you think we'd be saying as the things that change the most about consulting in 2026? What's going to happen over the next 12 months that is going to be exciting and change things up?
Yeah, maybe building on also what Rob said before, if I may, the consulting bashing that happened in the past year, and almost like to a degree of, I got really bored by it, because there was like every day on LinkedIn 3 or 4 people saying consulting will disappear. It's really nonsense, ridiculous. On top, I love this industry so much that I'm a bit biased, but I think we are in a phase where consulting is getting more difficult because of, at the client side, the complexity is growing, so business issues are becoming more complex. There is a requirement of speed and immediate results. And so in general, I think that there is enough work to do for consulting, and I would love to get back in it, but we discussed this before. If I would be 10 or 15 years earlier, and I saw there was a question about how to start or what would you do with a new firm, and I can say a few things about it, but there is so much opportunity there in the market. And that's also why I think this growing complexity that is helping the industry in, as you both said, Derry and Rob, that there is some early signs of, or there are some early signals of growth again. If you look at the bigger guys, so you call them the big 5, which is the big 4 plus Accenture, they're still growing, so lower single digit. But despite the headwinds and the announcements that they are about to disappear, they are still growing. So 4, 5, 6%, which is amazing, because that is growth on top of 50, 60, 70 billion. Yeah? So, but of course, they all have a challenging, and we all have a challenging macroeconomic environment. And they are doing some workforce realignment, but a lot of the announcements that we've seen are also a result of the let's say the post-COVID boom years, 22, 23. So they are now realigning themselves a little bit. And of course, there is as I already explained, that there is this AI thing, and that challenges them. Of course, it's not easy, but there are, if you look within them, and that's also important for the boutiques to learn from, there are pockets in the big firms that are doing extremely well. Everything with risk and cyber and a few technology domains, of course, and also AI, of course, is doing very well. But there are also pockets that are struggling, and some of them are having a big struggle, like human capital, human resources. So they're really struggling. Now, if you look at the boutiques, that's, of course, a patchwork of all kinds of firms and all kinds of sizes. So it's more difficult to assess. But as you said also, Rob and Derry, there are some early signs. And if you look at some of the research from like the famous researchers, Source Research in the UK, they're also seeing this early sign of recovery. So, and what they studied, and I'll stop there, is that apparently, and we already mentioned it, the specialists. So clients apparently, that's what Source found. They do buyer research. A lot of buyer research is always attractive research to read. So clients apparently seem to be prepared to shift some of their spend to more outcome-based consulting support from specialists. So outcome over effort, the big guys with their multiple billable hours, and compared to the outcomes that some of the specialists can deliver. So yeah, the positive signs, but a challenging market, and I'll come back to that later on in 26.
Yeah, and I think, Luke, I build on that in terms of, I think even in the, I'll use the word niche as opposed to specialist, but in the niche kind of providers, it is those organizations, and I look across our client base, I don't have to look any further than that are doing well, that are the ones that have got either a risk and compliance model.
Yeah.
Organizations in that space are doing really well, have grown quite rapidly, or are in quite niche areas of kind of transformation, particularly in kind of highly competitive markets. So I can think of an organization that works in a very niche area of transformation within financial services, in investment banking, and they're doing very well indeed, and I think that those sort of, I see three areas of growth. I think they're two undoubted areas of growth. That whole risk compliance and then transformation, and transformation's been around for a while. But I think the other one of which is that is enduring because of perhaps some of the macroeconomic and global kind of instability, is anything that's kind of got, and I use these words loosely and advisedly, but kind of cost reduction. Anything that in that space also seems to be doing well at the moment. I think you also highlight something else, which is we have to look at 25, 26 almost in a cycle of post-COVID. They're not years isolated in their own right. They are part of a cycle of recovery almost, where to a certain extent the industry grew too fast in 22-23, suffered terribly as a result of overexpansion in 24, and is still, there's a bit of a pendulum here where that's still swinging to kind of find the new equilibrium in kind of capacity, skills, and as we come off the back of that kind of almost COVID correction, as it were, then dealing with some of these other sort of technical innovation challenges, and AI at the forefront of them as both an opportunity and a threat, as we've already said, because I think we've focused a little bit on the kind of internal impact of AI in terms of consulting, what it means for people and commercials. But of course, there is a AI consulting angle to this, which is, actually there's an expansion. There are new roles, new opportunities, things that 3, 4, 5 years ago we wouldn't have conceived as being necessarily kind of services that are being offered. And perhaps some of that in a different guise, in a different way, still comes back round to what I see in perhaps 2026, which is going to be stuff around, again, kind of governance, risk, assurance, around how AI is being adopted. And you get aspects of that which run into the cybersecurity type, how it's being adopted, and some of the sort of technical exposure risk. But you also get stuff like fairness and bias and fairness and things like that. Actually, I was talking to somebody that's got a small consulting business that's growing quite well, and the only thing they do is effectively advising on and eradicating bias within AI recruitment models. That's pretty niche, quite frankly, as a service offering. Not something we'd have done 3-4 years ago. We'd have never thought about it. But actually, those sorts of businesses are emerging, and we will start to see a proliferation, I think, of new offerings that are actually coming off the sort of ramifications of what AI means. I think we've come through a journey where you might describe 24 as the sort of the are we, aren't we kind of year, do we, don't we kind of thing. The 25 has been sort of proof of concept. 26 ought to be kind of scale up and value return. I think there are some headwinds to that, and one of the headwinds to that is actually kind of almost human adoption. Actually, are we going to be the brake on kind of AI within our own industries and within our own organizations? And therein lies a whole other debate. But that's all stuff that I think will play out in some way in 26. I'm not going to sit here with a crystal ball and forecast exactly how, but I think aspects of that will play out very definitely in 26.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing is related to that. So the kind of AI journey that I see with a lot of firms is that they've realized that their clients need help thinking about AI. So they've tried to stay one step ahead of clients in terms of their ability to advise them. But I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say, like many consultants, they may not have been walking the walk internally versus what they were advising their clients to do. And there are very good reasons for that. I don't judge anyone for that. And what I think is now going to happen is people are going to start to have to this quadruple squeeze point earlier, they're going to have to start using AI properly internally. And I think that to start with, that is going to be about the leverage model. And can firms do things more efficiently, more effectively using AI and other automation tools? Because a lot of firms are behind the curve in terms of how much they automate internally to get their cost base down effectively. And there's been a lot of talk about that, but there really aren't many firms who are doing anything concrete on it in 2025. I see 2026 as a year that changes. I think then there's two big builds from the AI capability point of view on top of that. One is this speed to expertise point that we've been talking about, like the importance of expertise and how can you use AI to enable your internal knowledge management to get people to an expert level faster when they need to, whether that's when they join the firm for the first time or when they're allocated to a new project in a new sector or a new problem that they haven't worked on before. AI-enabled knowledge transfer is going to be the kind of second wave after cost reduction. And then I think we get AI-enabled new propositions. And that piece, people are kind of talking about, how can we use AI to deliver more client value? I don't think there's many firms that are really out there beyond what is fundamentally a transformation conversation about how should you start to use AI. They're not AI-enabling propositions yet. There are a few examples out there, but not many within the firms that we speak to. So I see that the use of AI internally initially for efficiency as the kind of starting point here, and then it'll be about expertise, and then it'll be about new propositions. I see that kind of flowing through in 2026.
Yeah. I wrote a LinkedIn post yesterday, Derry, and the title was AI will reward consulting firms that quit improvising. And what I was writing was that most consulting firms, and I get that, I've been there myself, they carry a legacy of saying yes to almost everything, of course, to protect revenue. But the result is, of course, that they start every project from scratch, and that makes codifying the work impossible. And in an AI space, the consulting firm that can codify repeated observations and reduce as I always say, outcome variability, those will be the ones that ultimately will be able to predict project outcomes and build differentiated IP. And that is, if the use of AI is attractive, that is, I think, where it becomes attractive. Because if you repeat, you gather data, you can codify that, you can use AI to study those outcomes, reduce variability, and then ultimately, of course, predict your outcomes better than ever before. And that's where specialism will become more and more attractive in the market. But yeah, if, of course, you keep saying yes to everything, then you have no chance to leverage that capability.
Just to kind of move the conversation on a little bit, because we've kind of really focused on the kind of the impact of, and we keep using AI, but basically the digital agenda in 25 and 26 and the pace of the digital agenda and what it's doing to our clients and to ourselves. I think there is another dimension to this to pick up, which is actually, in addition to the kind of technical skills or the consulting skills of digital, clients, in my experience, are expecting a greater degree of specialism in terms of sector knowledge and sector understanding. You know, the day of the generalist that could move liberally from public to private and back again, maybe that was dead a while ago, I don't know. But actually, even around, you know, subsectors within public and subsectors within private, there's a much greater demand now for people to be sector specialists and understand what's going on in a sector. That I can't do beyond quadruple in terms of threats to businesses. My maths and my brain aren't that good. But what I can see is that is another dimension to this, because actually it starts to add to, we actually need a greater focus on sort of subject matter expertise from a sectoral point of view. Does that mean we recruit from industry? Does that mean we recruit from competitors? How do we develop that expertise at a time when we've already said that there are probably fewer junior consultants coming into the industry than there have been for a long while because of the squeeze that we see? I'm going to leave it there. Discuss.
Well, I think that's a good point actually to pivot into taking some of the questions, because there are a couple of questions that speak to those kind of themes. So we'll carry on the conversation by answering some questions that you guys have put in. Please do, anyone that's watching out there on whatever platform you're watching on, just pop some questions in the comments and we will answer as many as we can. We've got quite a few to work through already. So Rob, just to pick up on that, because there's two related questions actually. So one is around, if in 2026 you were to start a new consulting business, no legacy structures, no baggage, like, how would you approach the design and build up of the firm? And then related to that is a question around what are the best business models for consultancies in 2026. And that for me is that sector expertise point is kind of central to that. But I'd love to get your thoughts. And Luke, obviously we were chatting before we went live on air about the challenges of starting up a new firm in the current environment. So I think that's
I can say a few
question
things
for us to dive into a little bit. So, what are your thoughts on what you would do now if you wanted to start up a new consulting business with no legacy structures? And I guess what does that mean for existing businesses as well that do have those structures and baggage, but could maybe choose to get rid of some of them?
I mean, there's always been that kind of dichotomy in consulting businesses about whether you're kind of capability first or whether you're kind of sector first in terms of, you know, both your go-to-market kind of approach and messaging, but actually also often reflected in terms of your internal organization. You know, are you to use the vernacular, are you a horizontal or a vertical? And of course, the answer is you have to be a blend of the two. You can't just simply be one or the other. What I see in terms of sort of success at the moment, and I can think of a number of organizations we work with, is actually they've almost reduced that down to a one by one. You know, it is, we only really work in one sector and we only really do one thing. And that is something that we wouldn't have seen 10 years ago. When I set up
No.
my original business 20 years ago, we set that business up on a 4x4 matrix, 4 sectors, 4 services. We thought that was quite tight. We thought we were being, quite disciplined in the way that we were doing it. And I think probably we were. But actually, that just seems to have accelerated now into that kind of depth. I think with that, there are a whole host of kind of advantages and challenges to it. But actually, were I, to use that word, a bit like Luke, were I 15 years younger, what would I be doing? And I'd be thinking about what is that kind of very tightly defined market. This isn't about saying I'm in financial services. This is about saying I'm in, a very narrow subsector or whatever it happens to be. This is not about saying I do transformation for financial services. This is about saying I do one thing. This is what I am really good at. And that's where I would be positioning that business. What those things are, that's quite interesting. I think the one word that I would pick up on, but from actually something Luke said and I've already said myself, which is anything that is kind of obviating risk or mitigating and managing risk is also very pertinent at the moment. And I think people see that more than ever. So, if you're a single sector, single service, and you've got a kind of risk bias to it in some way, I'd say you're on to, I wouldn't definitely say a winner, but you're certainly on to the right tracks as far as I would be concerned in terms of, where would I be starting?
Rob, just to clarify what you mean by that, like that is your proposition is helping clients manage and mitigate their risk.
Absolutely.
In some way.
Exactly. And that can manifest itself, everything from kind of cyber, that sort of risk, but right through to, I work with an organization that does human capital risk within the legal sector. That is quite niche, but actually, quite high demand as well,
Yeah. From a business model perspective, I 100% agree with the specialist focus and you're finding the intersection of the vertical and the horizontal. And I often say, kind of, you want to go narrower than you are comfortable being. You've got to feel like you've picked such a small niche that you're never going to be able to build a proper business around it, because once you win in that niche, then you get the right to expand if you need to, but you're not going to win if you try and go big from the start. Yeah. I think what that also enables from a business model perspective is a few different things. One is your marketing and your authority building, as Luke would call it, can be super focused, and that allows you to then build expertise as quickly as is possible, which isn't very quick. It still takes time, but could build that expertise as quickly as possible. And I think from a delivery perspective, I would be looking at more of a kind of diamond or pod model with heavy use of agents. And again, the specialism enables you to use the agents. If you are a generalist, you can't build automations and agents that do anything very useful. So that if you want to have an efficient, low cost, high impact consulting proposition in 2026, deep specialism with a pod system that is built around agents with the technical knowledge to do a lot of the what we would have traditionally used the bottom of the pyramid for. And there's another question about the future of the pyramid, which we'll come to, and enables your marketing and ultimately your pricing through all of that.
Maybe for the little story here, Derry, early 25, I wrote an article about if I were to start again, and the article got like almost 200,000 clicks, which I've never had before. So there is apparently some interest in the subject. So maybe say a few, if you allow me, Derry, is it okay to say a few things about it?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So I fully support Rob there and what he says about specialism. I'm a skeptic about industry, but for a boutique, by the way, because what most boutiques do is they list a whole series of industries where they've done a project, but that's not industry focus for me. So, but I agree with you, Rob, when you have a matrix capability versus industry, one capability, one industry, that is the success. I would say that would be what I would do, what I would focus on, but I would turn it into, as we always do when we do proposition and service design, we start with the issue. So we would say, what is the high stake issue that you guys with your expertise can solve quickly, reliably, and can build repeatable processes? And then, of course, the whole thing about AI codification of data, reducing variance, and all that stuff. So therefore, that focus is very important. But as we discussed before the webinar, and that was in my article, that was actually the starting point. Today, I would treat a startup consulting boutique specialist as a startup in SaaS, meaning I would hire senior people first. I would invest, so I would make sure that I can grow fast, that I can build credibility fast, that I focus on one value proposition with an immediate or a fast validation, so testing, piloting, so that I can validate that quickly, that I can build proof of concept, that I can explain that to the market. And then, of course, you have what you said, Derry, the whole go-to-market behind it, marketing, thought leadership, visibility, and so on and so forth. And if you are, like Rob said, you focus on, as we say, a capability in general. So like we are a data and analytics consulting firm, of course, then you are amongst 1 million other of data consulting firms, and you will be in trouble. So therefore, pick one and go for it. Invest in it. I think that is one of the biggest differences. If I compare myself, like in 2008 when we started, we had like 2, 3, 4 years time to bootstrap our consulting firm. These days, in such a brutal competition, I wouldn't do it that way anymore. So I would pre-invest like in a SaaS and then go for it with one thing. High stake, not to get too much into the order taker kind of profile. So high stake solutions like cyber or whatever, and then go for it all the way. That's what I would do.
Nice.
If I could just add one thing to what you both said, because I agree wholeheartedly. I think the other thing I would see is that from a capability proposition point of view, if you're in that, it's one proposition, it's one sector, it's one market or whatever, actually your offering has to be deep. So it has to go from advisory to delivery, actually even into kind of managed service kind of delivery. Actually you need to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with your client, not just to kind of lead them, but actually to deliver on their behalf or deliver with them. And I think that's also quite an important distinction in terms of how I see successful organizations moving forward. And to your point about analytics, I was involved with an analytics business here in the UK. We actually sold it last year, and that was a niche specialist, and that worked in a subsector of health, and it did one type of analytics for that subsector of health. And actually, within a space of 4 or 5 years, it became market leader and market dominant. And that's an excellent kind of, for me.
We worked with a few data analytics also, and they, I think last year, 2 of them, and they both reduced the scope of data analytics and they focused on one particular business issue. Of course, it doesn't mean that you have to throw away all the rest, so you can still have that there. And of course, you need that kind of expertise, like data integration, data cleaning, and whatever. But that's not the way you go to market with. You go to market with a high stake issue that you can solve better than anybody else. And the rest is in the background, and you move that step by step to the front. So it's like a fade in, fade out scenario of becoming that expert, and all the rest of the expertise is in the background to build that kind of or support that expertise.
All right, great answers, guys. I'm going to move on with another question here. This was specifically to Rob, but I'm sure, Luke, you'll have views as well around this point that boutiques and specialists are doing better. I think you've answered a few of these, Rob, but just if there's anything you need to add to this. So which niches which you've talked to, and like what do you mean by a boutique? Like maybe we can try and get to a kind of definition of a boutique, and then the follow-on question is like, how do these boutiques bill? Is it time, days, etc.?
So I think there are several things in that. So what do I mean by boutique? It's really hard to judge, because I think you go across different capabilities, different sectors, and actually you kind of get to kind of different numbers. I kind of, if I'm going to say anything on it, I think about businesses that are kind of 50 to 250, 350, 400 staff, something of that nature. They're probably more national than international, you know. But there is no absolute in any of that. There is, you know, it varies wildly.
What I would say is I've seen plenty of firms who have that very focused proposition, who are a couple of hundred people. Like you can grow a very material boutique consulting firm with a very tight proposition. Yeah,
I would agree, Derry. So I think you're in that territory in terms of scale. What that you know, I've seen kind of niche specialists in, well, actually just about every sector. You know, I've already mentioned kind of financial services, health, the law, you know, so I think you see them coming through in all sorts of guises from that point of view. And I think a lot of them do have that kind of advisory to delivery capability. You know, they are genuine in that sense, kind of business partners of their clients, and not just simply, as perhaps historically we might have seen, boutiques, perhaps slightly more strategy-based organizations. I don't think that's true anymore, far from it. I think these are deep delivery organizations. In terms of how people bill and charge for their time, I think Luke's already touched on it. We see a lot more outcome-based pricing for all firms. You know, this is not specific to any sector or subsector of organization or grouping, but we do see a much greater emphasis on kind of some form of outcome, whether that's fixed or whether that's capped or whether that's kind of some sort of gain share, risk share, whatever you want to use in that kind of terminology, but much more kind of outcome-based pricing. You know, people are far less likely to pay on what one might think of, and I now say traditionally, but you know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, much more input-based pricing, and the client therefore shouldering far more of the risk, as it were, and actually that not being shared in the way that I now see many organizations sharing that risk.
Yeah, I think for me, to definitely see more of the outcome-based pricing, and I think that is more enabled by better technology. Like when I was doing outcome-based pricing projects 15 years ago, it was an incredible amount of effort just to agree on the measures and agree on the baseline and actually track all of that it almost wasn't worth it. That's much easier these days in many ways. I do think the pricing model is somewhat client dependent, sector dependent. So if you're in the private sector, most firms would these days be pricing mostly on a project basis with some value upside, as opposed to saying we're going to bill you for X number of days of X number of people. In public sector, it's much harder to get away with that because of the procurement processes. I've seen some shocking examples of people gaming those procurement processes with day rates by grade, etc. Which that's a different story. But Luke, any thoughts from you
about this outcome-based pricing? I'm always very careful with it for two reasons. I'm not a big fan of giving away the control to the client. because you cannot always control what's happening in there from an engagement, from a presence, from a political whatever. So I'm always very careful with that, but that's the client side. On the consulting side, I agree with you. There is a lot of writing about this, but I think before going there, I would always advise the consulting firm, make sure that your proposition is well defined before, and that you can prove the outcomes that you can confidently deliver before you go into, maybe even before that, outcome definition or outcome-based contracts, not even pricing, but outcome-based agreements. And so if you say yes to everything and you have a service sprawl and a legacy of starting from scratch all the time, you will never get there. Defining outcomes, making sure that you can prove the value that you can deliver and the outcomes that you can deliver. So there is, I would say, be careful on the consulting side because of a well-defined proposition that you need and need to be repeated over multiple projects before you can predict outcomes or project. And at the client side, I would say be careful to put the risk, to give away the risk management of your outcomes to the client. So yeah, a bit skeptical there.
I mean, I don't disagree. I think what I do see is, and this is over a much longer period of time than just the last year or two, but a kind of more engaged and a more mature dialogue around how you do those things. I mean, historically, 10, 15 years ago, as you say, Derry, when you were trying to do it before or whatever, the consultant would be looking at the upside and the client would be looking at the downside, and never the twain shall meet kind of thing. Where now there seems to be a much more kind of shared understanding that there could be upside and downside for both parties in these outcomes, and actually how do we codify that, and actually how do we create something where there is kind of shared endeavor to achieve that. And it just feels like a more mature kind of conversation than certainly I was party to 10, 15, 20 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Okay. I think we've got time for one or two more questions. There's a really interesting one from Lauren here around the future of the apprentice model, and particularly with pyramids. And this is something that we talk with clients quite a lot about, is if we have the pyramid model moving more to a diamond with fewer junior resources, like what does that mean for development? And so my take on this is that we're still going to need juniors. They're just going to need a different type of skill that's going to be more related to AI if you've got an AI-enabled delivery. I also think that one of the things that firms are going to find is that the apprentice model almost needs to move to a two-way apprenticeship model, where the junior team are helping the senior team stay up to speed with some of the latest trends. Because what we're going to find through this next 12 to 18 months is that it's the senior folks who are going to have to adapt way more than they've realized yet to everything related to AI delivery, AI quality assurance, managing Gen Z and then Gen Alpha people entering the workforce, and all of the differences there. And that if firms can start to use the junior people to bring the senior people up to speed, those senior people need to be prepared to learn, which we don't see everywhere. I almost see it moving into a two-way apprentice model, but interested in what you guys see on that.
I've not thought about it in that way, but actually what I had observed is the sort of dichotomy that you've got two main skills that are being demanded at the moment: sector expertise and digital. And actually they are in different generations and different kind of components of the industry, or even in different layers of your organizational model. And actually, how do you recruit for them, and then how do you share that expertise, I think is an ongoing challenge. And I'm Derry, I think with your business and your business model, you're probably closer to this than I am, but I'm not sure it's one that many organizations have entirely resolved yet.
I think the risk is that if you only look at AI as a cost saving measure, then you're going to say, oh, we don't need so many junior people. And if you have a short term view, which too many firms do, then that apprenticeship model is under risk and the development model is under risk. But I think that if you have a view on, well, we're still going to need experts, clients are going to demand experts who are even more expert in a couple of years' time, then you understand a huge part of the value that your junior team are bringing beyond just their day-to-day delivery in that moment on that particular project.
I think the biggest change that will happen is that we used to bring those juniors along with us in the projects, and we built for training them. So the client was actually paying for their training. And that, of course, will change because of the whole new space of AI and all that grind work that will most likely be automated to a high level of or to a high degree. But at the same time, I think that consultancies will need to invest. So what we used to have 2-3 years. I hired juniors in my Deloitte years, and they had 3 years time to become at a decent level of consultant. But that is, I think, getting under pressure, which means that consulting firms will need to invest. So instead of billing them to the client for their training and taking the time for it, I think that consulting firms will now need to open the money back and invest in those people, which is totally different from the past. So that will also change the cost base. But because of fewer juniors, that's probably affordable. But I think that most consulting firms, and especially the bigger ones, weren't used to do that kind of investment. And that is also a mindset change that also need to be calculated. That is that how to what degree can we go? Is that still profitable? And so on and so forth.
Yeah, 100%. And juniors have often been a good source of high gross margins as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and you've also historically had quite a high dropout rate, so cohorts narrowing down naturally, through attrition over that 2-3 year initial period, and people electing to do other things.
Yeah.
Now you're going to have, that if there are going to be fewer of them coming in, actually you can't afford for that attrition necessarily, and you have got to invest in people in a way that perhaps historically we've not been good at.
Well, gentlemen and everybody watching, we are out of time, unfortunately. So apologies to those of you where we haven't got to your questions. We will answer them on LinkedIn or wherever directly. Make sure you get an answer to that question. We'll follow up separately. But is this gonna work? There it is. That slide. So if you would like to kind of get in touch with any of us, then there are QR codes at the bottom here. So you can book a chat with me directly, ask Luke for support through there, get in touch with Rob through his QR code at the bottom. The QR code at the top right there will just take you through to the Honeycomb content, what do we call it? Content ecosystem. So that will let you sign up for our future webinars, our free Substack newsletter that goes out to several thousand consultants every week, and just find more information. Luke, where's the best place for people if they're not ready to talk to you yet, but they want to follow some of your thinking?
So I would say go to LinkedIn and follow me there. All the other information like website, newsletter, so it's all in LinkedIn, and I publish daily, so you can follow me there.
Daily from Luke on LinkedIn. Awesome. And Rob, what about you? What's the best place for people to find out more about you if they're not ready to get in touch just yet?
Yeah, I'm in LinkedIn, same as Luke. Do follow us on LinkedIn. I don't quite publish daily, but 2 or 3 times a week. So there's plenty of kind of output and that there. Or go to our website, garwoodgrowth.com, and look at the kind of resources section. We've got a podcast as well as a kind of quite extensive set of kind of ebooks and things like that, all around consulting and professional services and the kind of development of those dimensions, I suppose.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. Please do get in touch if you want to chat about any of this stuff. We are all very happy to talk more about these things. And thank you, everybody that watched us there, and for all the great questions. Really enjoyed that conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Good.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Derry. Take care. Bye-bye.